What's up? Welcome back to another video. I finally got around to working on the diorama for my Zero and Type 95. The plan is simple, a jungle airstrip somewhere around 1941. From reference photos, I identified a few key elements to include in the diorama. A protective mound, a retaining wall made of palm trunks, some trees, and a bamboo hut near the aircraft maintenance area. These elements appeared in multiple photos, though never all in one place at the same time. So this scene is inspired by history but does not replicate a specific real-world airstrip. Today we'll look at the construction, painting and weathering of the terrain. Let's get started. Basic construction materials: styrofoam, double-sided tape, PVA glue and thin plywood. I choose an oval shape to eliminate dull empty corners in the diorama. Hopefully this way I can avoid them. First, I cut out a template from thick paper and secured it to the foam with a double-sided tape. Now it was time for my foam cutter. The hot wire slices through the foam and the paper template guides it nicely. It doesn't have to be precise since the plywood layer will go on top later, but we'll get to that soon. A utility knife works great for cutting out the basic shape of the terrain, just be careful not to cut yourself. So here's the very rough shape. There's still a ton of work ahead. Because I like to take things step by step, I'm moving on to the retaining wall next. I'll make the palm trunks using two-component putty, a wire and a bamboo stick. The core of the trunk of course will be bamboo. To give the putty something to grip onto and prevent it from sliding off immediately, I'll wrap the wood with copper wire from an old spool. No need to overdo it, just a few wraps will do. Palm trunks aren't usually perfectly straight, so I'll give them a natural look by quickly bending and breaking them slightly. Look at the copper wire that holds everything together. Now that the base is ready, it's time for the surface. I'll apply the two-component putty, smooth it out, and then use a silicone brush to replicate the texture of palm bark. Keeping the brush damp is essential to prevent the putty from sticking. I thought for a while about how to secure the trunks, and the best method seemed to be this one. Fine soil soaked with diluted PVA glue. It may not seem like much, but after it dries, the mixture has strength and an appropriate texture. It's quite a large scene, so to maintain variety, I'll add rocks. I'm using the good old plaster for their creation. This method is easy and allows the creation of rocks for any environment. So I mix the plaster and pour a bit of it onto the desired area. It starts setting quickly, so I begin shaping it immediately. First the rough shape, and as it sets, I take a hobby knife and start carving details. It's not rocket science, just cutting randomly and making grooves. The excess comes off easily with a brush. And voila, I have my rocks ready. I'm using this texturing paste for the first time. We'll see what it can do. For application I grabbed another piece of wood I had on hand, and I must say it's really easy to work with. Now I'm adding stones. I collected them on the dirt road behind the house and roughly sorted them by size. They'll work great for adding details to the terrain. I'm randomly scattering them on the surface from the biggest to the smallest. Oh, and when I see how many there are, I'm starting to worry about painting. This is going to be nerve-wracking. Although I pressed the stones into the paste, I think they might eventually fall out. This is a situation where thin PVA glue comes in handy again. I just need to wait for it to dry. Maintenance areas for equipment were often more refined than regular parking spaces, mainly due to frequent movement of personnel with tools. That's why I'm going to create a wooden floor in space for the aircraft. For this purpose, either a plastic sheet or a thin plywood would work, but I've chosen balsa wood for its easy workability. It's so soft that a simple hobby knife is enough to cut it and it doesn't take forever. I'm finishing the wood texture with light saw strokes across the surface. Let's glue them down. This time I'm using a thick PVA glue which I apply with an old brush. Hopefully, if I remember to clean it, the brush might survive. I place the individual planks next to each other with small gaps, which I'll fill with gravel later. Balsa tends to warp when it gets wet, so during the drying time of the glue, I'm using paint bottles as weights. This time I put the thin PVA glue in a spray bottle and applied it in this way. For the remaining parts of the surface that will represent finer sand, I'm applying air drying clay. I use my fingers for the larger areas and a toothpick for the details around the objects. On the road, I also need to shape the irregularities created by the vehicle movement and tire tracks. Next time I'll make them more prominent because I lost a lot of them during the process. Now it's time to cover the sides of the diorama with wood. The 0.4mm plywood is perfect for this task. I cut the necessary strips of material and glued them to the diorama using PVA glue. Again, PVA glue was the main player here. Since the plywood tends to revert to its original shape, the glue alone wouldn't hold it in place. So I grabbed a bunch of old pins and pinned it down while the glue dried. I really needed a lot of pins for this. After 48 hours, I dared to remove them. I was a bit nervous because the plywood was robust, but as I gradually pulled them out, nothing happened. The bond was rock solid. I immediately started trimming the excess material around the edges. The advantage of plywood is that it can be cut around the smallest irregularities, creating smooth transitions. The million holes left by the pins need to be fixed somehow. A simple putty did the job. And this is what it looks like after sanding. A similar texture is created using the same method, but this time with fine sand. Larger stones effectively cover the transitions. I mainly place them in the center and along the edges of the road, just as passing vehicles would push them aside. A great trick to help the glue spread evenly is to first moisten the surface with isopropyl alcohol. Since it has lower surface tension, it allows the glue to seep into even the smallest crevices. Alright, enough with the rocks, let's move on to vegetation. After a long time, I finally use my static grass applicator. The scene is set at the border between the forest and an open area with tall grass, so I want to have it nice and dense. I'll be creating the grass in 3 layers, gradually adding longer strands until the surface is densely covered. Using my favorite tool, a toothpick, I make small glue droplets on the surface which will hold the static grass in place. The longer static grass doesn't pass through the applicate well enough and doesn't create nice tufts, so I took matters into my own hands and started placing them manually, one by one. I did the same with the longest static grass. For dry dead grass, I'll be using this. Anyone living near coast will recognize it. It's seagrass. I collected mine during last year's vacation. The dry grass will mainly go under the bamboo hut where there isn't enough light. Vegetation isn't just about grass. Various small plants are commonly found as well. The ones that can be painted along with the grass will be glued in place right away. I'll cut the leaves using this tool and then simply arrange them appropriately. I want to have one large leafy tree in the diorama. These trees can make quite a mess, so I'm scattering some fallen dry leaves. The grass still looks too uniform, something is missing. I took the longest blades and randomly added them into clumps. That looks much better. Clumps with broadleaves for added variety. An interesting detail is the overhanging roots. These come from a clump of grass pulled from the garden. I will glue them between the trunks. And this is how the first part of the vegetation looks unpainted. It's a mix of different colors and materials. Let's fix that and unify it. I'll start with a black primer. its role is clear: to unify the surface and create fake shadows in areas where I won't be able to reach with further layers of paint. For the base color of the vegetation, I choose XF5. It's a simple green but has great potential for further modulation. I create highlights using lighter shade. Look at how the 3D effect starts to take shape. The final green in the lineup is this almost unnaturally bright color. It's strange on its own, but when combined with the previous layers, it creates a beautiful highlight. When it comes to the soil, it's a good idea to use similar shades as on the Type 95 vehicle, so everything matches nicely. I need to slow down a bit here since I'll be spraying between the clumps of the grass. I can't avoid some overspray, but I'll be happy if it's kept to a minimum. Back to the palm trunks. There are many of them in one spot, so I'll use multiple shades of brown to differentiate them. The surface texture will then be highlighted using the dry brushing technique and lighter shades. Since the wood in contact with moisture usually takes on a dark or greyish tint, I want to paint these boards exactly like that. As a base, I'll use dark shades, and with gentle brush strokes I'll create the wood texture. I'll combine various shades to ensure the surface doesn't look monotonous. Now let's paint the rock. The base is once again a dark brown, on top of which I apply lighter shades using the dry brushing technique. It's a quick way to paint the raised parts while leaving the recessed areas dark. This is where all the work of carving the rock will really show. The surface is covered with about a million little stones that need to be painted. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the test of patience. If I don't want the stones to blend in, I have to paint nearly each one individually. From a distance it's not such a big deal, but up close the difference is huge. So I grab a fine brush, a few shades from brown to grey and start working on them one by one. Grey is a very good base for enamel rust effects. Let's move on to the enamel effects. This is the step that will tie all the previous work together. First I apply earthy effects while the pen is still wet. This is a method where you don't wait for the previous layer to dry but apply the next layer right away. What's the advantage? Natural subtle transitions. If any transition doesn't turn out right, blending with thinner helps. I apply the lighter shade over the entire surface and the darker shade in areas with higher moisture, like around the planks, stones and grass. Once the first layer dried a bit, I went for the lighter shade to represent dry areas. I apply it using the dry brushing technique. We are getting close to the finish. I think I won't need to paint around the sides of the diorama anymore, so it's time to paint them. This is a good place to save on paint. A cheap acrylic paint from a hobby store will be more than enough, no need to spend money on expensive model paints. And that's all for today, friends. Here's the result of today's efforts. I have to say, aside from the tedious painting of individual stones, I really enjoyed it. It was a bit of change, an opportunity to open the door to creativity and try some new methods. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below, I'd love to read them. If you'd like to support me further, I'd greatly appreciate it. Check out my Patreon for lots of extra content, such as almost daily updates from my desk, high quality model photos, ad-free videos and early access. or consider becoming a member of this channel. Thanks so much for any support. A huge thank you goes out to my patrons, you are awesome. In the next video I'll start building the bamboo hut for this diorama. So something new again. I'm already excited. See you in the next one.